The maintenance of the blood flow is essential to life. The loss of blood flow may occur because the heart that pumps the blood fails, because of blood leakage, or because the blood vessels become obstructed. The coagulation system has evolved to deal with the latter two events under normal circumstances by providing qualities which maintain blood in a fluid state within the vasculature while at the same time addressing leaks. This formidable challenge is met by nature producing a three-component system which promotes vascular blood fluidity while anticipating the requirement for local blockade of extravascular blood leakage. The system involves the vascular endothelial cells which line the blood vessel, the blood, and extravascular tissue. These three compartments function to produce an integrated response to attenuate blood leakage by localized activation at the site of vascular injury, with the dimensions of the response relevant to the injury. The endothelial cells lining the blood vessel provide anticoagulants which maintain the blood platelet in a quiescent state. These cells also provide anticoagulants which inhibit the plasma blood coagulation system. The vascular anticoagulant systems are both passive and dynamic in nature and function in cooperation with plasma components. Heparin sulfate proteoglycans bind and activate plasma antithrombin, AT, greatly enhancing the reactivity of the serine protease inhibitor toward the enzymes which contribute to the blood clotting process. The endothelial cells also provide tissue factor pathway inhibitor, TFPI, which attenuates the clotting process by binding to the tissue factor, factor 7A, factor 10A product complex. Also constitutively expressed on the surface of the endothelial cell is thrombomodulin, TM, which binds thrombin and alters the enzyme to anticoagulant specificity by activating the protein C system. The blood itself is the primary supplier of pro- and anticoagulant proteins in the plasma and platelets, which are the principal blood-formed elements which contribute to the coagulation reaction. When the endothelial lining is disrupted, in this case by a perforating injury, the extravascular compartment and blood interact to rapidly produce a vigorous local coagulation response which attenuates blood loss and initiates the vascular repair process. The adhesion and aggregation of platelets to tissue collagen and plasma and endothelial cell-derived von Willebrand factor play the initial role in stemming blood loss. Platelets also provide the membrane receptors upon which the plasma-derived proteolytic coagulation complexes are formed and express their activities. Platelet adhesion, activation, aggregation, secretion, and receptor presentation serve to localize the blood coagulation process to the region of vascular damage. Tissue factor, TF, expressed on extravascular tissue, binds pre-existent plasma factor 7A to activate two substrates, factor 9 and factor 10, to their respective enzyme products, factor 10A and factor 9A. The enhancement in the reaction rate which occurs with the complex of tissue factor, factor 7A on a membrane when compared to plasma factor 7A toward both substrates is approximately 5 orders of magnitude. Prior to binding to tissue factor, plasma factor 7A is essentially inert from the catalytic perspective. As a consequence, in the unbound state, the plasma factor 7A is also largely impervious to the abundant protease inhibitors in plasma. A unique feature of the tissue factor, factor 7A complex is its susceptibility to inhibition by tissue factor pathway inhibitor, TFPI, a triple Kunitz domain inhibitor which can bind both the tissue factor, factor 7A complex, TF7A, and product factor 10A. However, the preferred target for TFPI is the product complex of TF factor 7A, factor 10A, TF7A10A. The preferred substrate for TF factor 7A is factor 10. Factor 9 is also a substrate, but with a significantly inferior rate of activation. Once produced, membrane-bound factor 10A can cleave one of the two sites, R152, required for factor IX activation, producing the intermediate factor IX alpha. Factor IX alpha is rapidly converted to factor IXA by the TF factor 7A complex. The small amounts of factor Xa initially produced, which escape inhibition by antithrombin, can activate a small amount of prothrombin 2 to thrombin 2A on the activated membrane surface. This is an inefficient reaction compared with the subsequent major thrombin production catalyzed by the prothrombinase complex, 5A, 10A, which is over 10,000-fold more efficient. However, this initially produced thrombin is sufficient to catalyze further activation of platelets through cleavage of the PAR1 and PAR4 membrane proteins, leading to further platelet activation, secretion, and aggregation. The small amount of the thrombin initially produced also activates the plasma procofactors factor V and factor VIII. Thrombin cleaves an internal activation peptide from factor V. The factor 5A product bound to its platelet binding site serves as the receptor for factor Xa molecules initially provided by the tissue factor 7A TF7A complex. The resulting prothrombinase complex 5A10A accelerates by over 300,000-fold the generation of more thrombin, thus serving as a major amplification loop.